Welcome to News Breakdown. In today's episode, we'll be taking a look at what you might consider a unique group of countries around the world that hold a position different from many other countries around the world. This group of countries is referred to as the Non-Aligned Movement. Over the years, some of the goals and aims of the movement have changed, and this is what we'll be taking a look at in this episode and other topics, which are in order: the history of the Non-Aligned Movement, what countries belong to the Non-Aligned Movement, how this affects these countries in the political sphere, what critics say about the movement, and the conclusion. Before we get into the episode, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, please do not forget to hit the bell button and please subscribe if you want to watch more content like this. And if you are listening to the audio version on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, please consider subscribing. Without further delay, let's get into the episode. Created in 1961, the Non-Aligned Movement, with the idea of creating an independent path in world politics that would not result in member states becoming pawns in the struggles between the major powers. These are basically countries that do not want to pick sides in geopolitics. Take what is happening in Ukraine at the moment. There are countries that have publicly stated that they will not be picking sides in the war, for example, India. India has publicly continued to maintain a diplomatic relationship with the country that is deemed as the aggressor in the situation, which is Russia. This is a great example of a country that takes advantage of having the non-aligned movement status. The non-aligned movement was formed during the Cold War. Initially, the movement started with 25 member states. The president of then Yugoslavia, Josip Broz Tito, was heavily influential in creating an organization that included states that did not want to align themselves with either the United States or the Soviet Union, but sought to remain independent or neutral. The basic concept for the group originated in 1955, and in 1961, the first non-aligned movement summit took place. The summit has been taking place every year since then. The purpose of the first summit was for the member nations to draft the goals of a policy of non-alignment. These goals were adopted as criteria of membership. The current chair of the movement is Ilham Aliyev, who is the president of Azerbaijan. So in this section, we'll be taking a look at what countries belong to this group. At the time of recording this episode, there are 120 member states within the non-aligned movement. Membership is drawn from the less developed countries from Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and Europe. We'll take a look at these countries moving from the west to the east, and we'll base this by continent. So starting off will be the Latin Americas and the Caribbean. The Americas contribute 26 countries, most of the countries being from the Caribbean. Moving on, next will be Africa. Africa contributes the most member states within the movement, contributing 53 states in total. The only two nations on the continent that are not member states are South Sudan and Western Sahara. Both are relatively new states, South Sudan being founded in 2011 and Western Sahara being founded in 1975. Europe only hosts two nations for the group. Europe contributes the least countries within the movement. The two members from Europe are Azerbaijan and Belarus, though Belarus has recently gone against the core principles of the movement by taking the side of Russia and the current ongoing war. Asia and the Middle East. So Asia and the Middle East contributes 36 countries, contributing the second most member states within the movement. Oceania holds 3 member states. Oceania brings to the table 3 nations, which are Fiji, Vanuatu, and Papua New Guinea, which is the home of the Sambia people, who are known for their interesting rituals they perform as a rite of passage of being a man. You can watch the video on the Sambia tribe by clicking the card above. So how does this movement affect these countries politically? There must be geopolitical benefits of being part of this movement, right? But that is not the case with this movement, as we have highlighted earlier in the episode. It is claimed that one of the political advantages of the non-aligned movement is the contribution it makes to world peace. If the members of this movement had taken sides during the Cold War between the Eastern and Western Bloc, the war would have been deepened than it had been. The neutrality that the movement exhibits has made the world a more peaceful place to live in. Another political advantage is the fact that the members of the movement have the opportunity to pursue economic, political, cultural, and social goals of their choice. They do not expect any form of interference from any quarters, especially from the so-called world powers. This leads us nicely into the final section of this episode, which is what do critics say about the non-aligned movement? Like with any movement, it is natural for this movement to have its critics. The same applies to the non-aligned movement. In this section of the episode, we'll be taking a look at some of the criticisms that are thrown towards the non-aligned movement. The first criticism thrown at the movement is that member countries of the non-aligned movement have many interstate or regional conflicts among them that they have failed to resolve properly. For example, in August 1990, Kuwait occupied Iraq. Although these two countries are members of the non-aligned movement, they failed to solve this problem. This is one of the biggest contributors of criticism, that countries from the Arab region do not have a complete trust in the movement. These internal disputes among the non-aligned countries and the lack of unity has weakened it in the eyes of the international community. The non-aligned movement has failed to get leadership in recent times, as it had in the beginning, like Tito, Nehru and others. At the moment, the current leader is in the form of Azerbaijan's president, who I should say has a colourful reputation, and he goes by the name of Ilham Aliyev. Non-aligned countries do not have their own military power, which as a group of nations makes them extremely vulnerable. Membership does not guarantee the safety of being part of an organisation like NATO. One of the principles of the movement is to condemn any form of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and systematic and gross violations of human rights, in accordance to the UN Charter and international law. But some critics will say that some of the member states are guilty of violating human rights at the highest level, which means member nations do not follow the principles of their movement. The final criticism we'll look at is that the non-aligned countries have failed in checking terrorism over the years. Some of the member nations have proved to be or are still hotbeds for terrorism. And as one of their core principles in terms of fighting terrorism, they face huge criticism as a movement as a whole. So, in conclusion, I find it quite fascinating researching this topic, as this was a movement I was aware of. However, I had not done this much research into the organisation. 120 out of 195 nations around the world are members of this organisation. That's 61% of the countries around the world are part of this huge yet unknown group. Over the years, you've had members leave the organisation, and I'm sure in the future will be more nations that will be joining this organisation. However, the actual relevance of the non-aligned movement continues to be heavily debated. The non-aligned movement is probably the largest non-Western institution. So thanks for watching. If you're watching this episode on YouTube, please don't forget to hit the bell button, and please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you are listening to the audio version on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.